Hi everybody and welcome to another piano video here on the Merriam Pianos YouTube channel. If you have been an internet user, and I imagine virtually all of you have, because here we are on YouTube, over the last 4 or 5 years, you will probably have seen some type of an article talking about the world's most expensive instruments. The 5 most expensive, 10 most expensive, 5 interesting pianos you've never heard of, etc., etc. Well, we've never really tackled this, and the thing that always feels a little lacking in those articles is it's clear that it hasn't really been written by somebody who was in the piano business or knew that much about pianos, or certainly the ones that I came across. So this is our list of most expensive pianos in the world as chosen by us. So thank you so much for joining us. If it's the first time that you've seen us here on the channel and you really liked the video, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe and notification bell so you can come back for more. Without further ado, let's dive right in with our list of the world's most expensive pianos right away. When it comes to collectability, when it comes to kind of extreme pricing on the piano side, I'm always quite astounded at the fact that the piano industry behaves and operates virtually like no other industry on earth. The pianos that we're going to be talking about today are valued at or are expensive because a whole wide range of reasons, and very little of it often has anything to do with the actual performance of the instrument or even the quality of that instrument. A lot of times it comes down to the uniqueness of the piano, sometimes it comes down to its place in popular culture, sometimes it comes down to a famous artist that's collaborated on this instrument, but very few times does it actually have anything to do with a measurable level of performance that the piano has. This is of course totally unlike automobile collecting, totally unlike I would say almost any other form of collecting where there is some combination of intrinsic value as well as collectible value and rareness. But for example, some of the instruments we're going to be talking about today, 2 of them don't even have known manufacturers. And what other industry, collectible industry, can you think of where 2 of the most expensive items that had ever been valued in that particular industry had a completely unknown origin? This is really, really weird to me, but also quite fascinating. We've selected 11 pianos for our list. Some of these may be familiar to people who are really into piano memorabilia. Some of them you may be hearing about for the first time. First on our list, regardless of how you slice and dice it, is for sure the most expensive piano that has ever been sold, and that is the Casablanca prop piano that was featured in that very famous scene where Humphrey Bogart leans over and of course said, play it again, Sam. A couple of really interesting points about this piano. First of all, it was a prop piano. It's not even a real piano. It is still unknown to this day, I suppose the person who bought it at auction would know this, whether the piano was even functional. It for sure started as a real piano, but the prop department narrowed it down so that it was the right height and the right width so that it was framed properly the way that the director wanted it in the scene. It actually only wound up with 15 some odd keys in it versus 80. And you'll notice in the scene that Humphrey Bogart often is leaning over the piano. This instrument, even though its proportion looks like it is like a 48-inch piano, in fact he's leaning quite a bit over, and the reality is that the instrument probably was only in about the 40-inch height range. The sound that we hear in the movie is also definitely not that instrument, nor was the actor playing the piano. It was all just mimed and faked, and it was overdubbed after the fact by a musician who was playing a real instrument after the fact. It's sold at auction for $3.4 million, making it by far the world's most expensive piano. The funniest thing is, of course, is by many technical measures, it wasn't even a piano. So I'm sure there's going to be some people who might even argue it shouldn't be on that list. But it did look like a piano, and it certainly did behave like a piano in the movie that made it famous, so hence it's on our list. The second piano on the list is the Heintzman Crystal concert grand piano that was constructed for the opening ceremonies of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. This was performed on by Lang Lang and was a really major, a very featured component of those opening ceremonies. But details of the piano itself are rather hard to come by. First of all, Heintzman at that time was technically a Canadian enterprise, or certainly a Canadian-owned and a Canadian heritage associated with that brand, or is that brand. But most of the pianos at that point would have been manufactured in China at the Beijing Xinghai factory. Heintzman had a collaboration with that factory, and they had kind of a dedicated portion of that factory where some of the original equipment and presses had actually been brought over from Canada. Now, this is where it gets interesting with this piano. It is very ambiguous, nor has it ever been confirmed that that piano was actually made of crystal. I think there was a rumor that it was made of crystal. I think the auction house, I think the manufacturer let that be a somewhat ambiguous, unverified claim that was kind of circulating around the internet that helped really create a lot of buzz. But I am really not sure how they would have accomplished building an instrument out of crystal in that way. Very likely, I mean, looking at this piano myself, and there have been a couple of articles that I read on it in which it references it as an acrylic piano. For sure, or I shouldn't say for sure, but my strong suspicion is that this was just an acrylic instrument that was described as a crystal piano because it got such a wide level of fame and notoriety. The descriptor of crystal probably stuck, probably started a rumor, and nobody thought it was in their best interest to dispute that rumor either way. Kawai as well also has crystal pianos that they manufacture, but those are acrylic. They've always confirmed that they're acrylic, but of course that name crystal piano is kind of a generic label that floats around and gets applied to a number of different manufacturers' acrylic pianos. Anyway, this Heintzman acrylic piano went up for auction very shortly after the Olympics and sold for $3.22 million US after only having been played once in public, as I said, by Lang Lang. As a piano itself, we know that the Heintzman company was producing, I would say, lower mid to mid-tier instruments at that time. It's really unknown whether this instrument received any different internal components than a standard Heintzman in terms of soundboard or string. I'm sure it received an enormous level of prep so that it was in concert readiness for performer of Lang Lang's fame and ability. But other than that, besides the price paid, the person who played it, when it was played, and the fact that we know who manufactured it, there isn't a lot else known about the internals of this instrument, which is an odd thing to say for piano that made it number 2 on our list. Number 3 on our list is an instrument which has very little public information, but a tremendous amount of information available if you do a little bit of digging, and that is C. Bechstein's Louis XV. Now, this instrument exists in 2 examples right now. And my understanding is that upon request and a little bit of arm wringing, this is something that Bechstein is still capable of producing additional replicas. But the original Louis XV piano was a gift from the C. Bechstein Company to Queen Victoria upon the opening of C. Bechstein's new London showroom. This, of course, would be in the late 1800s. And Bechstein spared literally no expense in putting this instrument together. At the time, the momentum was behind this brand to really become the preeminent luxury brand retailer on both the English side as well as the European side of the channel. They were doing really strong business in Germany, in France, in Britain, and many other parts of Europe. So Bechstein wanted to make a splash with this instrument. The entire piano is covered in 24-karat gold leaf top to bottom. That includes the plate, the inner, outer rim, all of the legs. But the real centerpiece of this instrument was the carpentry. This instrument, unlike many other pianos that are on this list, was not simply a stock version of the company's pianos, which you would then adorn with various attachments or veneers or additional accoutrement, but essentially you still had a stock instrument underneath it that had either just been painted or veneered or had the legs dressed up in a bow. This instrument was literally a from-scratch piano. The rim was different. The legs were completely from scratch. All of the support work between the legs, the piano lyre, everything about it was hand-carved in an intricate Louis style. And over top of the gold leaf existed many painted murals on the inside, outside of the piano. This thing was just a complete work of art in every sense of the word. When Bechstein went to celebrate a major anniversary in the early 2010s, somebody had the idea, probably Carl Schultz, who was leading the company at the time, that they were going to recreate this piano. And this was being done more as a celebration of the craft rather than to put this piano on auction or even to sell it. They never even tried to make this available for sale to the open market. It was going to be a piece of heritage that was celebrated almost at a state level. I believe it wound up at the Potsdam Palace. And they recreated this thing in painstaking detail. It took something like 3.5 years. They had dozens of artisans working on this nonstop. And the photography from this instrument, the level of detail from this instrument is just astounding. And just like the original, this was an example where they really did take a piano completely from scratch, not just a stock 212 7-footer. And built this thing from the ground up. Looking at and comparing this instrument to other instruments on the list, looking at not only the uniqueness and the historical linkage that this new replica had, but also just the sheer number of hours that multiple artisans from multiple disciplines needed to be involved in, and the fact that it was not a stock rim on the piano. All of these things together, I have to think if this had gone to auction or if it had ever been retailed, would have been in the high $2 million range, possibly even cracking the $3 million range. So I have included it on this list, even though Bechstein themselves never really affixed a specific value to it. Louis XV C. Bechstein is a 7-foot recreation of their gift to Queen Victoria. Just absolutely stunning. The next two pianos are recently manufactured pianos, both from the Steinway company in New York. Both are 9-footers and both were commissioned instruments in which they collaborated with well-known artists to create a one-of-a-kind instrument. And this is a situation where the piano itself largely remains intact. It's basically a Steinway D, but has been adorned by some really breathtaking aesthetics that are certainly deserving of a lot of praise and interest. My understanding is neither one of these instruments at this point have been sold, so the market price that Steinway's associated with these instruments are their best guess. We'll have to see at some point whether they do sell and whether Steinway discloses the actual final selling price. But right now, Steinway has priced both of these at $2.5 and $2.4 million, respectively. The first is a piano entitled Pictures at an Exhibition. And this was handed to the artist Paul Wise to tackle, and the piano is painted with intricate, painstaking detail, which really depicts the story of Migorsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. It kind of visualizes the narrative that tone poem was supposed to tell, musically speaking, but now we've had it translated into painting. The inside of the lid has been painted, the top of the lid, the entire outside rim of the instrument. And the legs, which look from the photos like they started as standard Steinway legs, have now been adorned with some very intricate carvings and other almost prop-like structures and figures, so that the entire piano, including the bench and the legs, are really helping to tell the story. As a point of interest, I think this piano is really fascinating. From an aesthetic standpoint, there are parts of it where I think, this is the kind of thing that would look incredibly cool in a museum. This is a difficult one to picture in somebody's home, but hopefully at some point it sees some musical appreciation, outside of the Steinway vault. But certainly it is a feat of artistry that this instrument has been completed. So pictures at an exhibition, $2.5 million as the asking price. The next one is the Fibonacci piano, which was created to celebrate the 600,000th piano manufactured by Steinway. And between the two of them, this one is really the eye-catcher to me. So this project was handed to an artist named Frank Pallaro, and he came up with this concept of the Fibonacci sequence being depicted through veneer. And there are thousands of pieces of veneer and multiple types of wood to really create this, one of the most intricately designed kind of veneer projects I think I've ever seen. So not only is this really, really interesting from a technical standpoint, for people who are into woodworking, I can appreciate it. I'm not a woodworker, so I'm sure people looking at this would be making far more intricate and detailed observations than I. But just the entire piano has a balance to it and has a really, really pleasing look that I think is a great success on all levels. Apparently they also produced about a half dozen slightly smaller versions of this, which are also going to be sold as these Fibonacci pianos. So that one clocking at a 2.4 million, also from Steinway. That takes us through number 4 and number 5 on our list. We'll be moving right along to number 6. Up next is John Lennon's Steinway upright piano. Now, Steinway upright pianos as musical instruments are certainly well known, and from a musical standpoint have always been regarded as being sufficient, adequate. Really, Steinway's reputation was made on their grands. I think their uprights were always probably viewed more as a necessary evil within the company, since the grands were the ones in which virtually all of the patent focus and R&D went. However, their uprights still play really well. And from a durability standpoint, they were definitely built to last. John Lennon's Steinway Model Z, or if we're in the United States, Model Z, was the piano used to write Imagine on. And this went up for auction, and George Michael paid an astounding sum of over $2 million. I believe it was like $2.3 million in change for this piano. And for a time, George Michael actually had it in his personal possession, was using it to record and write some of his own music. I think he realized that it was a lot more fun to show this off, and so he began to tour the piano around. It went on display, made some stops in various museums and other music memorabilia places. And I believe the piano is still essentially on permanent display. But for a while, George Michael did have in his possession John Lennon's personal instrument, and certainly paid enough for it. The piano on its own is a relatively short kind of console-style piano, but this is one of those instances where association with a particular artist and a place in history is what really drove the price of this instrument through the roof, much like the Casablanca piano. Really not based at all on any level of the intrinsic musical qualities of the piano, entirely based on the collectability and association with really major cultural milestones, events, or events through history. So that's number 6, John Lennon's upright piano. Number 7 on the list for me is a real head scratcher. Not because people aren't paying the money, but because it's such clearly a Schimmel Pegasus, which has been gold-leafed by another company and being resold and repackaged. I don't know if that's the case, but in every article I could find, this was not mentioned. One of the articles mentioned that it was in a Pegasus shape, but there was never any credit still given to Schimmel, who is, of course, the original manufacturer of the Pegasus piano. They release it in 2 different colors. It's a fiberglass instrument. It's a very, very unique shape. Very cool. In fact, several have sold here into Toronto. But this company, Galaxy, which I believe is a Middle Eastern-based company, a major kind of luxury retailer or brand, is obviously taking these instruments, making physical modifications to those instruments, and gold leafing these instruments, and selling them for well over $1 million. So I don't know whether specific modifications extend beyond simply the gold leafing. I know that they talk about the fact that it has player piano installed, that it has a self-closing lid. I mean, all of these items can be had from really any capable piano retailer for $40,000 at most. So this is one of those situations where branding and where making the claim that this is the world's most expensive production piano has obviously convinced some people that this is a good spend, a good value. And for sure, the instruments are of high quality, and the fact that they've been gold leaf definitely does make them unique and probably collectible. But still a little odd that for something that is so iconic and easy to recognize as a Schimmel product, there's really no mention of the original manufacturer anytime you see this Galaxy piano mentioned on a list. Next on the list is another C. Bechstein. This is the Sphinx piano, and this is an instrument that is in quasi-regular production. This can be ordered from Bechstein, and it is available for about $1.2 million. The instrument is not nearly as intricate as the Louis XV. This is one of those cases where more or less you're starting with a standard Bechstein, 212 7-footer, and then that instrument is getting adorned with some very, very intricate inlay work, some additional carving and accoutrement to the case of the instrument, to the bench of the instrument, and really giving it a look that kind of crosses between sort of a French and Egyptian look. It's very striking, and there are a couple of examples floating around of this Bechstein Sphinx. I would love to see this in person. Anyway, Bechstein Sphinx clocking in at 1.2. Now for people who are less familiar with Bechstein and maybe more familiar with, say, the Steinway name, Bechstein, besides these various decorations that they've applied to some of these instruments, the internals are pretty noteworthy as well. The soundboard material that they're using is the same soundboard material that Fazioli uses. This is from the Val di Fiemme in Italy, and they taper that, and it sort of behaves very similarly to like the Steinway diaphragmatic soundboard. They manufacture their own hammers using walnut and mahogany cores. Their actions are designed in-house and manufactured sort of jointly between them and Renner. And the rib material and the crossbeaming is probably some of the most intricate carpentry and integrated design that you're going to see from any of the grand pianos in the industry. So as an instrument itself, it's really quite stunning. It has a very unique kind of orchestral tone to it. But then, of course, you also have a few examples where the extremes don't just stop at the specs. They really get into something that looks like the Sphinx. The next two on the list both happen to be Bösendorfers. One is the Kuhn piano. Kuhn was the name of the designer who took a Bösendorfer, I believe it was a 225 if I'm not mistaken, and essentially built these gigantic diamond shapes out of a number of smaller crystals onto the side of this instrument. The piano sold for $800,000, or certainly it was listed last at $800,000. I believe it was just one example that was made. Bösendorfer was hoping initially to get $1.2 million, but there just was not enough interest. The piano is done in a high polished black with these kind of shapes on both the outside as well as the upper rim. And while striking, perhaps the issue just was that there was not a big enough difference between it and the stock instrument. And for what's probably about a delta of $650,000, you really just want you need to want a bunch of large, shiny, diamond-shaped objects on the side of your piano. By far, my favorite of the two Bösendorfers on this list is the Bösendorfer Opus 50. This was a really lovely design using a tremendously high level of craftsmanship and veneering, and this piano is just truly elegant. In some ways reminds me a little bit of the Fibonacci Steinway, in that the center focus of this instrument is the woodworking and veneer on the outer case. It sold or was priced for about $750,000, and to me is a much easier pill to swallow in terms of associating that value with the craftsmanship and the instrument. Of course, Bösendorfer making lovely instruments generally. So that was the Opus 50 on Bösendorfer, clocking in at $750,000. This next one is as fascinating to me as any. Marilyn Monroe's white baby grand piano. It's fascinating because we have no idea what the piano is. It was a functional piano, it was a working piano, but it was probably of average quality, likely American built. It could have been a Wurlitzer, it could have been a Baldwin, it could have been anything sort of like that. But the branding was stripped away because at some point a craftsperson was hired to convert this into a white lacquer piano, and the branding got stripped off. The plate obviously lost any branding and serialized numbers as well, and so it was just this white baby grand, pretty nondescript white baby grand. But it was well known as being Marilyn Monroe's, and so because of that association, Mariah Carey paid quite a handsome sum of $695,000 for that instrument to have the piano that Marilyn Monroe owned. So unlike John Lennon's piano, where it was associated both with a major musical historical figure, as well as the piano associated with one of the biggest songs of all time. So there's several points of fame kind of interacting with that instrument. The Marilyn Monroe piano really was just by association with this major star, but it still managed to fetch almost $700,000 at auction. No word really on what Mariah Carey did with the instrument after. Certainly I wasn't able to find too much information about it. But to me, just one of the most interesting things is you literally have a generic piano in which the origins or quality of this instrument is entirely unknown whatsoever. But that's not even really the point. It's just the fact that Marilyn had it. Then the very last piano on our list is the Fazioli M Liminal. Now, this came out in two versions. The M Liminal was a shorter piano. It was a 6-foot instrument that had this kind of very sleek, futuristic black fiberglass shape kind of trailing off the end of it. And then the Aria was just a larger version that I believe was just produced as one example as a request from a collector who clearly liked the M Liminal but wanted a bigger one. And so I think that wound up being a 7-foot version, whereas the M Liminal was just a 6-foot version of that instrument. It is almost sort of looks like a space duck in a way, but in the very best of ways. I don't say that with any sort of disparagement whatsoever. It's really one of the most original design concept I've seen applied to a piano, and certainly was slightly ahead of its time. There's now more piano designs that are coming out that kind of start to resemble those types of shapes that the M Liminal had, but that piano was out probably 15 years ago in its original design. So now we have instruments from even Roland on the digital side that has started to kind of mimic some of those lines. But the original, the M Liminal, was for sale, and it sold sort of in and around that $500,000 mark for the few people out there fortunate enough to be able to get one of those into a hotel or possibly even a home. That finishes off our list of the world's most expensive pianos. We really hope that you've enjoyed going through this list, learning a little bit about some of these historical instruments. Certainly I enjoyed the research part of it, particularly the Louis XV Bechstein. That one was a very, very cool story. Anyway, if it's the first time that you have seen us here on the channel, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe and the notification bell so you can come back and see us for more videos. We're always coming out with these piano videos, and so we hope you'll be back and enjoy some more with us. My name is Stu Harrison. This has been Merriam Pianos on YouTube, and we'll see you again soon.